So how about we get some of the punters up on stage who, some of them even came twice, and welcoming on the panel Nicole Woodrow, the most important person on Link Wentworth. I can't even read the title of Nicole, but Nicole is in charge of innovation and everything. She's a dynamic part of one of our CHP cohort. To Guy Chalkley, the Southie from South East London, who gave us that personal touch wandering around Dagenham and where he used to get in fights as a teenager, and it's all turned around to now he only has fights with the ETU now, running Endeavour Energy. And to John Burton, particularly, and welcoming John, OBE, Only Bowls for England, one of the Aussies who helped build East London in the first place. We had the great pleasure of his stint at Westfield in Europe and then back at Lend-Lease here. We took the chance in London at Australia House to induct John as the first life member of the Western City Leadership Dialogue. So please all join us on stage. Hey guys, as you know, we punched it around London for the second time quickly and packed an awful lot in. Let me start with you, Guy. You said homegrown hero went home and you've worked around the world. What are you seeing in the middle? You're in charge of powering Western Sydney through Endeavour Energy at the moment. But go back to being that kid knocking around the southeast. You said something the other day at a gig. You sort of said to Western Sydney, stop beating up on yourselves. We were doing this stuff for 30, 40 years. Overnight successes in East London didn't happen in 10 years. So what was that reflection?
I think you beat yourself up a fair bit as well. Like, you've got to appreciate you go back to somewhere that has finished, sort of, and then you think it happened in a blink of an eye. It took a long time to get there. And so for me, I sort of literally went back to where I started my career. And so, we literally did do Barking and Dagenham in East London. We literally drove past the first flat I ever bought, which was 111A Cherry Tree Lane in Raynham, and it was opposite the Dagenham Ford plant. And I can assure you, it was neither a lane and there were no cherry trees there. So,
and there's no plaque out the front yet, sadly, is there?
And so, it's interesting. I didn't think I'd go back 25 years later, and the original high-rises had been knocked down, so the 60s developments had gone. And I did not believe I would be getting a ferry from Barking Reach into the centre of London. But it took a quarter of a century to get there. So, your reflection is, there's a lot of political parties that will be on this ride for a fair bit of time to get to where you've got to stay strong on that journey for a long time.
Nicole, we had one of the, I think, most interesting experiences was to visit Poplar Harker, a social housing development in the middle of old East London, the East End, like the original East London, and an area where I think they said 1 in 4 kids still live in poverty, right? In a modern Western democracy place. We learned a bit just looking at it, like I make fun about a lick of paint changes a place, but it was quite remarkable, wasn't it, the way they've taken a social housing development and given a pride back into a community, which has led to a greater input from that community, that development. What is it you're involved with Link Wentworth here, and just happy 40th birthday, by the way. What do you take from that as to how CHPs and public housing authorities can probably engage with the community they're trying to help?
Yeah, I think that was a wonderful example of how a community housing provider engages with the community. So they go in at grassroots, they listen to what that community needs. And what we saw was a rejuvenation, not a demolition of that community, but it was rejuvenated. It was rejuvenated by some quite simple things, really. Sometimes it was just about good streetscape, it was good landscaping, it was about good connectivity. It was an excellent example that that community was divided by a road that they'd been lobbying for quite a long time to get better connections with either an overbridge or a pedestrian crossing. And when that went through, it reunited the community again instead of dividing it all the time. So there are little things that can be done, but most importantly, the CHP, or housing associations in England, really get to the grassroots of that community and build the community up, understand what youth issues there are, what economic issues they are, and then work with those groups to inspire and be proud of the community they live in.
Yeah, it was quite amazing. John said you've been on that East London journey and been one of those bunch of Aussies, David Higgins and yourself and others who really were Australians at the centre of redeveloping East London. some of that extent, ironically, it came out of the Thatcher government, Michael Hasseltine, the Conservatives, what is it, a very Labor area of East London, a poor, disadvantaged area. And it took a bunch of riots in London in the late 70s, early 80s that sort of started that process. I'm hoping we don't need to go the riot process to kick on Western Sydney to the next level, but what did you see in the politics? You're in business, but intimately involved in that political play that drove that. What do you see as a political dynamics that can maintain what has been largely a 30, 40-year commitment to East London? We've had a 10-year commitment to Western Sydney so far. What do we need to do to drag the tail out?
Thanks, Chris. If I look back at my time there and I look back at the history of it, one of the things that really characterised East London was a lack of opportunity, it was deprivation, it was life scales that were different. And the thing that I think largely dragged it out of that situation were principally personalities. Personalities that were prepared to stand up and fight and make a lot of noise. Personalities that had the ability to join the different political thoughts together. You had people like Sir Robin Wales, as hard left as you can possibly come for, whose whole concept, he was a Labor mayor for Newham, and he fought for the concept of convergence. Right, he wanted to see a convergence where the east and west of London had the same health expectations, where they had the same facilities, where they had the same opportunities. He ensured that every school child in his council area had the opportunity to trial a sport, to play an instrument, and to these things. On the business side, you had personalities like, and we met her, and she spoke to us, Baroness Jo Valentine. She was the glue that actually brought business together with government and said to business, we need, whether it was the Elizabeth line or whether it was other major pieces of construction, getting business to acknowledge that it was prepared to pay for it, right? She acknowledged that the government had to put its hand in its pocket, but the work that she did in bringing business together to say we have to fix this and it will not happen without business playing a role and accepting regimes of contributions, accepting that land had to be compulsorily acquired, accepting that the planning system needed to change, we never would have been there. So I put it...
John, to that, you were running Westfield London at the time and building that, if those who get a chance to go to Olympic Park in London, 12 years younger than our Olympic Park, a little more commercially dynamic than our Olympic Park. But you're running Westfield. If you're running a Westfield here, do you think you'd have had the sort of seat at the table to be part of planning something as you did in London? Or has crusty old Blighty got a thing or two to teach dynamic young Australia about interaction of public and private?
No, it's become more difficult at both ends. One of the great things that I had in my time there was accessibility to the highest levels of government. Call it lobbying, but all I tried to do was to make a business case, right? And that has become increasingly harder. But I also tried to influence the way, and did influence the way planning occurred. One of the things I think we deeply miss here is everyone believes that the development is a very linear process, right? And therefore, you don't do whole phases of development in parallel. And what I'm getting at is, when you submit a major application, everyone wants all the detail. It's an overreach, right? You should be able to have an outline consent, simply saying, here is the envelope in which you develop, this is the amount of space you can develop, and guess what? These are the contributions that you will have to make. The developer then gets on and finds the funds. The developer talks to the tenants whilst the final detail, while everyone designs the product. But this process at the moment where we have to have every single element of planning and design decided is, in my view, an overreach and is one of the great handbrakes of development.
Guys, is it just government's fault, or is business getting as conservative as government as well?
Yeah, I was sort of just going to add a bit to John's comment. So, I mean, one of the reflections we went and we saw, it was Darren at Barking and Dagenham who ran that council for a fair bit of time. And there's a bit of that old Steve Jobs quote: "You'd rather be a pirate than in the navy. You've got to break a few rules." And I think we looked at, and I think we even were in the room when he was saying what he'd done, and we sort of went straight to, "Oh, we couldn't do that." And I don't think he could either, if we were really honest. But he sort of did. So I think the big personalities are here, but there's a lot of compliance that goes around it. And so, how can you play around some of the edges of the compliance to get it moving? Yeah, there's a bit of a pirate in there somewhere, isn't it, that makes it move?
Everyone's inner pirate come out.
It's the personality with the push, isn't it, that you probably need.
Nicole, I mentioned scale. We met with Fiona Fletcher-Smith, a friend of ours, a friend of the Dialogue, who was the CEO of L&Q Housing, a not-for-profit community housing, a link Wentworth of the UK. There's only one difference. She has £40 billion of assets under management. Link Wentworth's a little bit smaller. Can we ever truly get our CHPs that have professionalised their management but without the scale, can we truly ever get to the sort of impact that CHPs, the not-for-profit private arm of government, can get to if we have so many CHPs, so many smaller ones, or do we need to get that sort of consolidation to be able to be the partner that a housing crisis really needs?
Potentially there would be the efficiencies in some amalgamations happening, noting that there's 3 tiers of CHPs.
Link Wentworth, you've already amalgamated, yes, you've done your bit.
Link and Wentworth, yes. There are 3 tiers of CHPs and they do slightly different things. So maybe in delivering that service there is levels of amalgamation. But an important difference in East London at least was that largely local councils are responsible for social and affordable housing, which means they have a very common objective and they have land assets. So to get to that scale really is about utilising partnerships and accessing land, whether it's with Homes New South Wales, and also potentially local councils as well. Ultimately, there's a collective desire, I think, more than ever before to deliver more social and affordable housing. So who do we collaborate with? Who are our best partners? Where's the common objective and vision? And I think we can make a big difference, but it's an emerging issue at the moment, and it's best to now, I suppose, find the best partnerships and start that process to secure the land, basically, the land and the assets.
I've promised them all early marks, so I'll bring it home with this one for each of you, and then we get the great Tim Reardon up to bring it home. You know, he's back from Dublin, so we've got to give him something to talk about, bring all his own Northern European experience. If you could take one thing out of what you saw or your experience in East London, and in a perfect world, just drop it into a project, a culture, a process, whatever, for East London, from what happens in East London to what we would do in Western Sydney, what would that be? And I'll start with you, Nicole, and come back this way. So I don't pre-brief them. I like the spontaneity and really trick them.
Actually, the answer I want to give is not really the answer to your question, but I think the most...
I'm used to that from politicians, that's right.
And Guy alluded to it a minute ago. At that council that we went to, they had a difficult situation, didn't they? They had to really do something to renew their council area. It was diminishing with population base, didn't have any jobs, and it was the leadership of that one person who came in largely and said, we have to pull some major levers to make a change. We can't keep doing what we've always done before. And not to be too contentious, but he did privatise his planning department.
He quote, Dagenham, Barking, similar geographically to Campbelltown, privatised their planning department. So there is and I'll just seed that thought there somewhere as a process.
And I'm not suggesting that's the right thing to do by any account. Everyone did take a gasp in horror. But I think the point was that they recognised they had a problem.
Yeah.
And they had to do something drastic about it. And I think, you know, we're at that point now, isn't it?
Business
Have
as
to think
unusual
differently.
in a crisis.
Have to think something different.
The old Southie, what do you reckon?
So I had a similar theme in the sense that I think my takeaway was, I think they had two burning platforms that was playing out there. Big personalities pulled together. One probably wasn't a burning platform. They won the Olympics. Like, they needed to do something. And then they got some really good personalities who drove that sort of thing through. Dagenham was the biggest council estate in Europe, like the biggest council estate in Europe. Everybody in Dagenham worked for Ford Motor Company. It shut down.
A Newcastle BHP kind of equivalent.
So that's literally what's happened. And I think if you take that to Western Sydney, perhaps you've got to be honest that there is a burning platform and admit it. And that it's not affordable to live here. And so why can't we create something that's affordable for people, but accept that there's something that then really drives you forward to make it happen?
JB, what would you could go for 3 hours on this question, but what would be the one you'd pair off from your experience there that you'd like to see, be it government or business here?
I think...
Or I'll let you have both, government and business, right?
Well, I think they go together in what I was going to say. I think we've touched on it a few moments ago when we talked about scale. And nearly all the projects that we saw have their own sense of scale, and most of the people on the tour were blown away about how quickly that scale came. And to me, that is the true definition of urban regeneration. You know, so many people turn up to a council meeting and say this is a great example of urban regeneration when they're developing 5,000 square metres. You know, urban regeneration occurs, in my view, when both government and private enterprise and academia and culture decide that it's worth investing billions, right? And what we saw was the snowball effect of that, you know, and it doesn't have to be one or the other, but it does have to be both. And when it happens, you know, you get, if you want to talk in simple terms, the Olympic Park. Okay, Westfield invested at Stratford because we saw an opportunity others didn't. We saw that opportunity primarily because of the convergence of the rail transport there, right? Everyone believes it was just the wrong place to do business. We analysed it differently, we saw it differently. The Olympics came and created a great park and created great facilities. But then Boris, love him or loathe him, he understood the value of culture, right? And he had this vision for the Olympicopolis, which became, you know, the BBC and Sadler's Wells and Victoria and Albert museums. And you think how many of our museums in Sydney and New South Wales have got 80% of their stock in warehouses, right? But anyway, Boris saw this. He started talking to the Smithsonian. Everyone thought he was mad. And then I remember he called Frank Lowy himself.
So he was mad, but it doesn't mean he was wrong.
But he called Frank, and then he wasn't afraid to go and ask with the begging bowl. He called myself and Frank Lowy in and said, you know, I want to build this great cultural facility out in the wasteland. And he put the begging bowl out there, and I remember him asking Frank for £50 million. Right? He didn't quite get that, but he did get a sizable donation. But he was prepared to go out and say to industry, to everyone, put your hand in your pockets. So that, to me, is that PPP in a very different way. But they did do it at scale, and that's, to me, what urban regeneration needs. 400 metres for the Todds should be 800 metres. The standard in the UK, if I look at projects I've worked in Italy and France and whatever, they draw a kilometre around these facilities now because that's regarded as adequate walking time. Guess what? In that kilometre now, if you build something, you can't put a car in there, right? That's how you get transition. That's how you get to sustainability. So, you know, we have lots of opportunities. We heard about the Campbell that haven't even had the compass put around them. So there are a lot of these opportunities, but it is the combination of public and private willingness to snowball each other's investments, in my view.
There you go. It said there's a reason that we at the Dialogue have built up, not only taking 2 study tours, but a permanent ongoing dialogue with legislators and developers and community organisations in East London, and while we'll continue to. We're hoping to work with the state and federal government, and we're about to launch the first airport of the century kind of thing, and an aerotropolis and a metro network to service it. We want our Premier and Prime Minister on a plane flying around the world saying, bring your money to Western Sydney. Use the model. We want them to start in East London. We want them to understand the model, because I'm sick of people saying, oh, we're more like Dubai or even Singapore. Well, they're not like Australia, and we'll never be like those models. In Windsor we like. And East London is like Australia, yet it's done it better. Parts of Canada are like Australia and can do it better. We need to learn from jurisdictions of similarity, political and industrial and cultural similarity. And East London is such a great model. We both hosted Olympics for our countries separately. And if we continue to work together, so we're going to keep that bond strong. Faith Halliday was up here before, has launched an ongoing alumni group to try and keep the bonds. We want to host some of those East London guys in Western Sydney and bring them back. We've done MOUs with universities. We need to get a state government prepared to allow their bureaucrats to travel again and stop being the hermit state of New South Wales, and really engage productively. And I think that will allow us to take advantage of that sibling region relationship that's there. Can you please thank these 3, not for only enduring me as a tour leader, but for joining us on stage.